This is Tyrese Halliburton, and you're listening to Setting the Pace.
Joining us now from No Ceilings, it is Rowan Kent here to talk NBA draft with us as we are approaching the draft in just a few days. Cannot believe the draft is already here, but we're here to talk all things NBA draft. And the Pacers will not be making a pick until Thursday because they only have pick 36, pick 49, and pick 50. So, Rowan, thank you so much for joining us. How's it going, man?
It's going great. I've got a great background that shows things are moving. We're moving ever closer to the day, a 2-day event, really exciting. It's the middle of the day for myself on Pacific time, so I'm going to be eating lunch and diving right into the second round, which is where we're going to focus on, given it starts at pick 36 with Indiana.
Let's start there with the draft being 2 days. I'm curious if as someone that covers the draft, how much do you enjoy that it's going to be stretched out to 2 days, and what does that mean for this draft in general, just first and second rounders?
You should ask me on Friday. I'll be able to give you the best answer. No, I think it's really exciting. There's so much fanfare that goes into other drafts. You see with that NFL draft, they can stretch it out over 3 days, how many people attend it live. The NBA, fewer players. Each pick is a little bit more important to next year in the future's team complexion. So it makes everyone have that extra bit of intrigue. I think that it's a big enough event that it can support 2 days, and I think it's going to let a lot of guys in that second round get the shine that they deserve. We've seen a lot of players in the second round start to have bigger impacts, and so I'm excited for it. I'm really excited to get to cover one of my, if not my favorite thing, over 2 days instead of just one now.
I'm really excited about it because I think last year Alex and I we were trying to do it live, like right after the Pacers picks, and then the night was just dragging on, and here we are battling to stay awake while the Pacers select Isaiah Wong and Mojave King, late in the second round, and it's just those were guys that weren't going to make a big impact last season, didn't make an impact at all, and yet it's just such a late night. Now I feel like after night one, you could have the excitement of what just happened, but I feel like there could be a lot of buzz about what trades could occur or anything of that sort. Also, with the Pacers having the sixth pick in night two, if you want to put it that way, it gives you a little bit more anticipation that we're not going to be waiting so long to be on the clock. But I guess my first question for you is just from a general standpoint, who in your mind is the star coming out of this draft?
That's been the kind of question that I feel like you can ask myself, you can ask other writers at No Ceilings, you can ask a lot of people, and you'll get so many different answers. For me, in terms of all of the guys that I've watched this year, I think the star upside that I would bank on is Alex Sarr. There are a lot of things that make him an unusual choice in this way. The amount of minutes he played, the fact that he was playing in the NBL, there weren't as many of the eyes on him. The fact that he wasn't a number one sort of role guy. They weren't expecting him to come in to be the scoring leader. However, when you watch the way he plays, when you get to see the physical tools that he has on both ends, not only how he moves on offense between sets, when he's attacking the rim, when he's spacing out, but when you also watch him on defense, his hips are very fluid. He's a great mover around the rim. He has great reaction, so he can control with weak side shot blocking, but he's able to switch pretty comfortably onto the perimeter. And especially in the modern NBA, if you have a big man who can do that, it opens up so many different possibilities for the rest of your team. While there's no one that obviously last year has its unique aspects of having Wemby as a guy you really felt as confident as you could, barring injury, that he was going to be a star. It's not as easy this year, and I feel that Sarr provides the kinds of traits that you're looking for. It'll need development, but that's someone who I think could be the biggest star.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with him, especially since he's publicly said, I believe, that he does not want to go to the Atlanta Hawks. I think that'll be interesting to see what happens. It could be a pretty chaotic draft. Unlike last year, we didn't see a ton of trades. But speaking of big guys, there's two big guys here locally, Khalil Ware and Zach Edey, that I think a lot of Indiana fans will have interest in to see where they kind of go. Just kind of curious your thoughts on both of those bigs. Obviously, they're two totally different players, but what you think they'll do draft-wise in terms of where they'll get picked and then kind of how their careers could project out.
Yeah, I think they're both really interesting centers to consider in how Edey may be a more traditional back to the basket size wise center, while Ware has a bit more of the versatile elements to his game. I think at this point in the cycle, looking at where they've worked out, things that have been said behind the scenes, just following and reading how the winds are moving. I'd feel confident in both of them going in the first round. I think that you should definitely start paying attention as soon as it ticks into the double digits of picks. Either one going in the top 10 would be a whoa, exciting moment. I think they both have the case where a team, if they bring them in, get them to meet their front office, could talk themselves into either one playing an important role. With Ware, compared to what he was looking like at Oregon, he really took major steps forward in all areas of his game. He's still really young. He's still really athletic. Imagine what he can do once he gets a few years in a team system is really exciting. I wouldn't call him a total anchor at the rim or a guy you will always want to run your offense through. But if you're looking at someone with maybe number 2, number 3 upside for both of those elements of your game in a draft class like this, there are teams that are going to really be swayed by the improvement Ware made in just a year and ask themselves, why can't he do the same if we get him in the building? Edey, on the other hand, has such a complete body of work that regardless of the stylistic, maybe juxtaposition you could feel, you're thinking, oh, he would have been drafted first if this was 30 years before. There are people that are informed on draft Twitter who are ranking him very highly because at some point you can't ignore the metrics, the great advanced stats, watching him, his interior dominance on both ends. I think he can have a very comfortable place in the league, not just as I think in the preseason, oh, a 20-minute per game kind of guy. I do think that Edey has clear paths to being a starter and is someone that could be, you look back and say, we should have just read the numbers. He's that good, he's that dominant. And if he lands in the right situation, it could happen quicker than a lot of people assume.
Yeah, it's great for Edey because I feel like last year they had it projected maybe outside of the first round. Now it feels potentially like a comfortable lottery pick or so. So yeah, that's awesome to see because I don't know what more he could have really done, coming back to college. So great stuff by him. But talk to me about defense. Who do you view as the best defender in this draft?
So I'll break it up into two just for the fun of like looking at maybe perimeter and interior because I've spent that time and I really like to look into the minutia. It is two guys that both played on the same team that beat Zach Edey's team in the final. I think the best interior defender by my evaluation this year is Donovan Clingan. He has the size, he has the awareness, he can really move in a way that not as well potentially as Sar to switch, but he has the size, the weight to push around guys. He is switchable in terms of you can put him in a drop, he can get to his spots, he can really harry other big men. And so, especially looking at what he can project to as well with his wingspan, his youth, there are some injury concerns, but it also is almost the other side of the coin to think we've seen him play in smaller spurts. What can he look like if he starts to develop more? And so, interior wise, I think Clingan is my top defender. On the perimeter, Stephon Castle has a lot of understandable questions, and most of those are on offense. I think when you look at him defensively, he can switch one through potentially even onto power forwards. He stays attached. He gets into his stance well. You're not going to rock him off of his spot. He has great hands. He plays within defensive concepts to a T. And especially for a freshman player, he has the instincts along with the physical tools to start to match like the potential he can have much sooner. I think both of them were big reasons, obviously, why UConn ended up repeating, but more so than the expected parts of their games. Their defensive aptitude was what helped propel them to that repeat and is what makes them such valuable defenders in this class.
When I heard Facci ask this question, I was kind of expecting a different answer for your perimeter guy, and that's Ryan Dunn from Virginia, who I've seen be labeled as the best defensive prospect in this draft. And so, just to kind of go that route a little bit, I think that there's a handful of Pacer fans that are kind of intrigued by what he could potentially become as a player. His range seems all over the place. I've seen mock drafts that have him at 20, 22, 24, and then I've seen him come all the way to the second round. I know that his offense is pretty lackluster, but where do you think he falls in terms of draft position?
Yeah, Dunn is very close in terms of, for my personal thing about perimeter defensive guys. I think that his range is a fascinating one to consider. Pretty early in the season, and for good reason, he earned this reputation as a game-changing defender. He kept up with it. That was something that's consistent the later into the season you go with Virginia. He is a fully switchable, mobile, menacing kind of guy. There are few players who would ever look at being smaller or quicker than Dunn and think it's a mismatch. He can change some of the geometry of a defense because of those offensive limitations that he showed. I think that probably towards the end of the first round, as teams are starting to look into more specialized role players for their slots, you get to teams that had playoff success and could be looking to just fill that niche. That's where you're going to see Dunn's name. I'm not sure exactly which team will be the one that bites on him. There could be a few, such as if New York really feels like it, if Minnesota wants to continue to compound their defensive identity, or going into the second. I think there is worlds where you could see Dunn getting to pick 36, and I think he can fit nicely, although not cleanly, maybe for immediate minutes, into what the Pacers have working.
I think right now it's going to be hard for someone to kind of make an immediate impact on this Pacers team, but I think they are looking for the best available player at pick 36. But a player like Ryan Dunn really does feel that he could be what they're looking for, because they do need help defensively, especially at his position. But, give it to me straight. I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off. Who do you see as a good fit for the Pacers at pick 36? Maybe throw out two names. Factor in, we are looking for like a wing, someone who could contribute on the defensive side of things, but also best available talent at pick 36. Sometimes that's just enough.
Yeah, I think that you make a really great point. Whoever is going to get drafted by Indiana is going to be hard pressed for the immediate minutes. Just looking at the depth chart and seeing the success that y'all just had in the playoffs, it's a great position to be in to not need someone to step in right away. I think in looking at the wings that'll be in that range, there might not be exact sorts of stoppers on defense, guys who can jump in, but there are definite players who are talented enough that you would not want to pass up on what they bring, maybe thinking of a longer range type of progression for their career. I think a guy that sticks out is Dylan Jones from Weber State. He is someone that I'm a really big fan of on my personal board. He's all the way up, I think, just at like 21. I think he's even risen up at other times to be in the teens. He's someone I think brings such a jack of all trades, in a good way, master of none element to any team that he's on. He was the straw that stirred the drink for Weber State. Really high usage. He was the end all be all. Did a great job of dishing to teammates. He's a bigger playmaker. He has solid size. He has good scoring instincts. But of all the guys, and there are many at smaller programs who carry so much weight and then struggle to adjust to it, I think he's built to then scale his game down and play an impactful bench role. You're not drafting Jones likely to be the kind of guy who will have that same role that he had at Weber State, but he showed improvements as a shooter. He would keep a lot of the sets that the Pacers have running cleanly. He can do some of the secondary playmaking that can take some of the pressure off of Halliburton, or if you go completely for bench units, he can play there. So I think Jones is someone who's just too talented not to look at in that range. A slightly different flavor on the wing would be Kevin McCullough from Kansas. I think McCullough came screaming out of the gates. He was someone that was putting it all together in a way that not only draft people, but NBA people had wanted to see. And towards the end of the year, you just didn't see him because he was injured. He was having to deal with a recurring knee problem. As he's been in the draft process, I think that the ebbs and flows of his stock is starting to calm down. McCullough is a guy who does the dirty work, who makes the right play each time. He has good wing size. You can throw him on defensive matchups. He can stay attached. He's someone that brings a veteran presence. He will have no problem fitting into his role and doing so right away. And I think that if you're looking for more of a guy who probably could play in those spot minutes where you'd want to have a better defensive lineup, McCullough might be a bit more aligned with that idea. It's not like you're giving up on talent either. Him and Jones are in very similar ranges, not only on mine, but across a number of boards, whether at no ceilings or otherwise. So each one of these guys offers a bit of a different look on the wing, a bit of a different feel. And at 36, pretty early in the second round, there are going to be a handful of other wings. You might have Nikola Jurisic, you might have Jalen Tyson, Justin Edwards, Harrison Ingram. There are a lot of different wings who could be available for the Pacers to select. And that makes it exciting to think about what they're going to end up doing.
Yeah, I think the Pacers, one of the problems they do have is so many guys on the roster that are already contributing, pretty deep, talented team. So these guys that they draft likely in the second round won't see the court, although spend a lot of time in the G League. But even Jarris Walker, who was drafted 8th overall last year, spent a lot of time in the G League too. So Indiana's kind of in a weird spot because they have so many young guys. But one name that I've kind of liked for the past couple of months when I've watched his game, and I'm just not sure exactly how he'd fit with the Pacers, but I'm curious your thoughts, is the power forward center from Marquette, Oso Ighodaro. What are your thoughts on him as a player, number one, and then potentially his fit with Indiana?
Yeah, I think Oso brings a lot of the different elements that the Pacers would be looking for from a big. I think he has that positional versatility. There might be other guys like Adem Bona or Yves Missy who'd be straight centers. The other guys like Bobby Klintman who might be more of a power forward. Ighodaro can switch between those. He played exclusively center at Marquette. However, he could do a great amount of their short roll playmaking. He was making reads. It wasn't simply getting him into the action. He was following a script. He can freelance a bit and see success. He's a good interior finisher, and I think he's pretty light on his feet. You'd want to see him start to bulk up so that he could take some of the beating if you're going to run him at some center units. And that's not unexpected. There are a few guys that come in even after they've been in college for a few years and are totally physically ready for NBA basketball. So I think Ighodaro could be a lot of fun to watch coming off of like screening actions, already facing a bent defense, and then getting to manipulate it further. So that would be a really great pick. I do wonder if he would be more of a target in that 49 or 50 range.
Mm-hmm.
His stock is one where he's worked out for, I'd say, at least 9 or 10 different teams publicly, if you look around at what's reported. So his stock is one where he's going likely in the second round, but where exactly? It's pretty hard to pin down. You could say that about a lot of guys, Ighodaro included, but given the Pacers have the picks in 2 different slots, you can look at him for either one, and you'd come away pretty satisfied with what he could do for the team.
It's exciting options. I think this second round, I think you can find good talent. And I think that last year is kind of an example of that. Last year in the second round, Gigi Jackson, Trace Jackson Davis. I thought those were 2 players that went, in between the mid 40s to the late 50s. And those were all rookie level talents. So who are maybe 1 to 2 second round picks that you think are really going to outperform their draft stock next season?
I think, and you brought up what ultimately a lot of people somewhat forget, is not every year, but often a guy from that second round will end up on those all rookie teams. It's just due to opportunity. It's due to the talent that maybe gets overlooked based on intel, based on the year. And looking at some guys who could have that immediate impact, I would look at guys such as Jamal Shed coming out of Houston. He's an undersized point guard, but that's about the biggest knock you can put on him. He gets in your face. He will not let up as a defender. He's led a team like Houston that's had great success. He's the kind of guy where if a team needs someone to come in the second round to give them good minutes in the second unit, he's the one that will surprise. And in the same way, someone like Andrew Nemhard has started to show more of the potential since he's been in the league. He might have been drafted with a thinner band of expectations and has worked hard, but also shown the same kind of play he had at Gonzaga the more minutes he's gotten. Shed brings that same kind of energy, brings a bit of the same upside because of how hard he works. You're not going to find many guys, that worked out against him. Agents have probably done their part to make sure their guy isn't getting just a hand in his pocket the whole workout. And in the NBA, he's going to be able to do his best to get there as well. Another guy who flew under the radar mostly because of how late into the process he fully committed is Cam Christie out of Minnesota.
Mhm.
Christie is young. Christie has great size, and as a shooter, he's one of probably the top 5 shooters in the class. Great form, can get it off from a number of angles, quick release. He can do it off the move. He's someone that you really have to get close to. Shooting very quickly gets you on the court at the NBA level. Whatever team will take Christie will want to see if he can hold up physically and bring more besides his shooting. That was a big question that likely went into his decision. There were other offers that he was likely seeing NIL wise to transfer from the Golden Gophers, but based on him staying in, he himself is confident and teams are likely giving him the feedback that they feel he can do more than just shoot. If he was just a shooter, he would still probably get drafted, but he's someone who's definitely risen up to go higher than obviously preseason, but higher than maybe a lot of people expect, and then to pretty quickly be a floor spacer who can demand some minutes and swing games when you least expect it.
This is probably the most talked about name that's probably not going to be a first round draft pick. That's Bronny James. I'm curious your thoughts on him as a prospect, number one, and with the Pacers having 3 picks here in the second round, if he's still available at 49 or 50, would he be worth the risk of Indiana taking someone like that?
I think as a prospect, Bronny hears so much about what his last name is and how that can cloud his overall stock. When I evaluate him, I do see a combo guard who has solid size. He is a solid defender. He has shooting chops they can bring. He has a good game IQ in a sense. His awareness on the court is good. He's willing to fill into different roles. I think the growth that he showed between his junior and senior seasons really validated the rise up rankings that he saw. He ultimately ended as like a higher 4-star prospect. And had he not had his really tumultuous year, not only health wise, but trying to get minutes for the Trojans, this year's USC team had a number of talented players who played below their expectations. Their own win record was below. Basically nothing went as expected for the team, including what happened with Bronny. I think when looking at probably in the 49 or 50, that pair of picks, it's worth considering if a shooter who has some defensive chops, who has good athleticism, who's shown a willingness to play roles could fit. I think other guys, like I mentioned, Christie, there are guys like AJ Johnson or AJ Mitchell in that group of guards. Bronny is worth consideration for teams there. I've heard enough at this point from just public statements from either his father or Rich Paul that I think whatever team drafts Bronny will feel confident doing so because they like him as a player. They don't want to get caught up in the circus of will we, won't we with LeBron James. And I think he is a guy that is worth considering towards that end of the second round as someone who, what can we do with him in a few years as sort of a delayed gratification type of pick if he can reach more of his ceiling?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I really do wonder if, Clutch, his agency, is going to push to really get him on a guaranteed contract as opposed to a two-way, which obviously very much complicates a lot of things because last year we saw that as, oh, well, why wouldn't the Pacers just take Trace Jackson Davis? And then we realized it wasn't that simple. He didn't want to be on a two-way contract, and Golden State enabled him that opportunity. So a little tricky with Bronny. I think if it was as simple as that, hey, pick 50, no-brainer. But my last question for you is if there's going to be one player in this draft that happens to slide on draft night, similar to maybe a Cam Whitmore of last year, who do you think that player could be?
I think someone who has definitely been projected pretty highly, but could start to have that waiting in the green room type of moment is Ron Holland. Holland is a guy who came in with a lot of understandable hype and expectations. This entire G League Ignite team did. It's folding at the end of this year. You can kind of see how that went. Holland not only had maybe not the year he was expecting, he didn't shoot the ball particularly well. He wasn't in a system that was accentuating his talents. He had a bit of issues meshing with Matas Buzelis and a lot of the other guys on that team. I think that with Holland, there is enough that is to be considered of the on-court product alongside teams simply looking at their depth charts, making decisions about who they want to bring in, that even past where maybe Chicago or Sacramento are drafting in the teens, which would have been a slide for Holland already, he's worked out for both the Miami Heat and the Los Angeles Lakers. That's been out there publicly, and neither of those teams are in the lottery. Neither of those teams are in positions to trade up. So you can start to follow the thread of his camp and his people at least preparing for what might be a very different draft range than a lot of people expected. I still have a lot of faith in Holland as a player. He ended in the top 5 on my board. At the same time, I think I acknowledge that some of the questions that I wanted to be answered for him this year weren't, and a few more cropped up, which will lead him to maybe go a lot later than people were expecting, having heard his name in some of the preseason conversations about the draft.
We're going to wrap things up here, but with the question Facci just asked, I have to ask you the opposite of that because I think it's really interesting. We always talk about who could fall, but who is someone that you think could maybe surprise in this draft and get drafted a little bit earlier than people are projecting?
Yeah, I think with so many questions towards the top, even if you might have heard some names, there are a few that will go higher. Cody Williams was someone who pretty early in the season established himself as a top 5 pick favorite for Colorado. I had a chance to see him in person after a really quiet first half. He erupted in the second, showed a lot of the reason why he was being considered. He had to deal with a number of injuries down the line at the end of the year, just the issue of less visibility, plus the games that he came back, he wasn't his full self. Did a bit of a number on his public stock. I think that he's a player who, starting at the Pistons at number 5, you could start to see Williams' name called. He's a lanky forward who shows a great scoring touch. He has a nose to get to the rim. He's a good shooter. He has a lot of upside on both ends, and he obviously needs to put on weight, but having the NBA pedigree with his brother isn't even the biggest reason that you'd want to draft him. That helps to say, oh, he probably knows what it's like at the NBA level, but there's so much two-way potential, and you could see him become a scorer that can make a difference, that even if Williams is right now a lottery projected prospect. He's someone who could go higher in that top 10 than I think people might have been expecting, especially as the cycle started to wind down.
It's going to be interesting for sure. So I'm excited to see what happens. I think this draft is very reminiscent to the 2013 draft, where it was just kind of chaos, and you could see guys that you would never expect to become stars get drafted at 15, 27, whatever. So it's going to be really exciting to see. But Rowan, thank you so much for your time. We're going to give you a chance here now to plug anything you'd like to plug for what you're doing over at No Ceilings.
Yeah, if you are trying to get that last dose of 2024 draft news in, or if you're someone like myself who's a complete sicko and looks at it around the calendar, the Substack for No Ceilings, a number of our writers at Twitter, myself at Rowan Kent, and you can get all kinds of mock drafts, big boards, see all of it. Yeah.
Good stuff, man. I
Awesome.
appreciate your time, and I know me and Facci really enjoyed your commentary on these players. Great stuff, my man.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot, Ron.